All right, let's head over to the Zoom line where we've got Warren Martin on the line with us. He's with Kansas Strong. This is going to be part of a 10-part reaction series to the Paramount Plus series Landman, put out by the producer from Yellowstone. Quite a bit of publicity put into the Landman series, and we're going to look at it from a industry point of view, and good, bad, ugly. Warren, how you doing today?
Doing great. How about yourself, Jason?
Not too bad, not too bad. So this was only available on Paramount Plus. Did you get a chance to watch it?
Absolutely. I watched every bit of the first two episodes, and we're going to talk about the first one today. But yeah, it was intriguing. Is
So
intriguing.
I've only watched the first episode so far,
Right?
uh, and we could talk about the end of the episode, which they attempted a cliffhanger at the end.
Mhm.
And of course, if you work in the oil and gas industry, you saw it coming. It was about as subtle as a slap in the face. The safety video, which they ended with on the cliffhanger. But overall reaction, just your overall reaction of episode one, Landman, available on Paramount Plus. Billy Bob Thornton stars. What'd you think of it?
Well, I think it's of course it's written by Taylor Sheridan, so it's a lot like the Yellowstone episodes that have come out. And I have tons of I come from New Mexico. I come from a farming ranching background, and when farmers ranchers that watched Yellowstone, they kind of had a surprised reaction to it from the one standpoint of the fact that yes, these are the things we deal with, but that's to the most extreme possibility that you could possibly have. And that's not what any average farmer rancher goes through on a daily basis in any way, shape, or form. But the issues that are in there are that important to the farmer rancher. And I think that this is keeping up with Taylor Sheridan's view on things and how he really puts things forward. In the fact that everything that was in the episode are things that landmen deal with and people in the industry deal with, but every single thing was to the absolute extreme. I know thousands of landmen, and I don't know a single one of them that was held hostage by a cartel at gunpoint in a hood to make a decision about a lease that was coming forward. I mean, that definitely is a possibility that could happen at some point and may have happened at some point, but it's not the standard operations of a landman. But I think when you really bring it back to it, where it did nail it right was um, when you had Billy Bob Thornton and he's talking and he says, and as Norris, and Norris says, he has two jobs, and his two jobs are to secure the lease and manage the people. And when you secure the lease and manage the people, those two jobs, they can bring a lot of controversy. They can bring a lot of drama. Generally not anywhere close to the extreme that's in this show, but those are the two jobs of a landman: is to secure a lease for oil and gas operations, and then to manage the partnership. And I think that's what's really lost in the movie is oil and gas really expands and oil and gas really accelerates across the United States because it is a partnership between the oil and gas operations and the landowners.
Landman started out with Billy Bob Thornton, bag over his head, a gunny sack over his head. He's in a Mexican cartel barn or a shack, and he's negotiating mineral rights. And I thought the same thing that you did. Like, okay, this has maybe happened once in the world of because you start thinking about it a little bit, and when you get into Texas, it is a different ball game when it comes to culture, when it comes to different governments, whether it be the cartel or the Texas Rangers or the U.S. government or the West Texas high school mafia, whatever you want to call the different angles or the different groups down there. They do exist. And so, on one hand, I got to be honest, I kind of rolled my eyes and I thought, oh, this is not starting out good. But shortly after that little theatrics was done, which I'm trying to, again, suspend some belief here and think, okay, this is being sensationalized for Hollywood. And, there's a little bit of Ozark and some other shows that probably played well with the cartel, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and some of these other shows that have tested pretty good with the cartels. So, all right, we'll go ahead and throw that in there. It's down near the border, so it could be believable. But in the opening sequence, it went from being a prisoner of the Mexican cartel to cutting a deal with the Mexican cartel to doing business with the Mexican cartel to helping better their land so that their land can be more productive. I mean, it was rather remarkable. And what I wrote down was Billy Bob Thornton's opening monologue was fantastic. The more the oil company grows, I'm sorry, the more that the company grows, the more that the oil company grows. And it kind of set the stage a little bit about how everything that we do really is powered by oil and gas, whether it's the cartel, whether it's the schools, whether it's building roads, or it's those companies that are above oil and gas in this sector of the economy. I think he said there was two or three in his opening monologue, but all two or three of those industries are dependent on the oil and gas industry. So if those three industries grow, well, so does the oil and gas industry. Peeling back some of the ridiculousness, I did think it did a pretty good job of kind of setting the tone that there's a lot of people against the industry. There's a lot of people trying to take advantage of the industry. But at the end of the day, the industry has a certain set of code, a certain set of rules that if it doesn't flow, the oil doesn't flow, and the trains don't come through the station, there's a whole heck of a lot of problems to be had. And when they had that airplane slash semi slash drug deal gone wild, whatever the heck that was comical. When he came in and he's trying to figure out an end around the dead bodies and the drug dealers and all these other things, because we got to keep the 4,200 barrels of oil moving through there every single day. That part I found to be pretty entertaining, actually, especially coming from the oil and gas industry and what I've witnessed over the past decade plus.
Yeah, and I don't know of a single company that's built a road like that for transportation of oil and gas, especially a paved road that has telephone poles going down both sides of it. That's definitely not a road that the oil and gas built. But I think you bring up a couple of good points, and one is I think going very back to the very beginning of it is he wasn't really making an argument that this is going to help the cartel move forward. On the what he really brought up at the very beginning was the dispute, and it's a dispute that landmen face on a regular basis. And that dispute is the difference between your surface rights and your mineral rights. And I would say the most people in the United States don't understand there's a difference between surface rights and mineral rights. And where a lot of conflict comes in the oil and gas industry is in the difference between those. Because a lot of people have this idea, I own the land. If you want to access my land, then you have to make a deal with me. But the US government has really been very clear on this, that there's a separation between who owns the surface of the land and who owns the mineral rights that are underneath the land. And sometimes that's the same person. A lot of times it's different individuals. And I've seen situations here in Kansas where you can have someone who owns the surface rights and they own 100% of the surface rights. And you might have 64 people that own parts of the mineral rights that are underneath the land. And the federal government has declared that you cannot prohibit access to those mineral rights for the mineral right owners. You have to provide access for them to be able to get to their mineral rights that are there. And that's where a lot of conflict comes in, because what benefit is it to the landowner, and in this case, the drug cartel? What benefit is it to the drug cartel if they own the land, but they're not getting any of the money that's coming in from the mineral rights that are there? That's where that conflict really came to be. And the conflict is real. The scene that we saw in the movie, probably not so much, but the conflict is real. And there's a lot of landmen that have to negotiate that and really put something on the table that's beneficial for the landowners, and then also put something that's beneficial on the table for the mineral right owners, and bring all three of those parties together, the surface rights, the mineral rights, and the oil company, all together in a harmonious relationship that's able to extract the oil and natural gas. I didn't like how the movie or how the show began, where you had a cartel that was using its guns as leverage for their negotiating tactics. And I really didn't like when Norris came back, Billy Bob Thornton, and his role came back and said, "Well, I'm going to get Halliburton and all these other oil companies, and they're going to come down on you, and they're going to crush you like a bug because we're bigger than you are, and they need us more than they need you." Because neither one of those really happened. Yeah, what really makes land deals take place is a harmonious relationship that is beneficial for the landowner, beneficial for the mineral rights owners, and beneficial for the oil company. And that's a hard compromise to get to. And that's why when he talks about that his two jobs are to secure the lease and manage the people, that's the managing the people. The managing the people is figuring out, how do we get all of these parties surrounded around one common vision that's going to move this process forward in a harmonious way, because no landman wants to show up on a property and be faced with a gun. I do know landmen who have been confronted by someone standing there with a gun, because farmers and ranchers are very protective of their land, but never to the extreme that's in this show. But it shows that that conflict is a real conflict, and it's a place for education in our industry where it needs to be developed, and helping people understand how that harmonious relationship can take place that benefits all parties involved. And I know tons of farmers and ranchers here in Kansas that will tell you the only way we made it through the lean years is because of the oil and gas operations on our property. And so when Norris sits down with the rancher, and the rancher says, and Norris says to the rancher, "You're in the oil business. You just choose to spend your money on cattle." That's not really a true statement. To some degree, it is. There are years where you are in the oil business and you're spending your money on cattle. And there's other years where you're in the cattle business that is putting up with the oil company that's not really paying out as much as it used to pay out, because we are a boom and bust economy when in the oil and gas industry. It goes up, it goes down, it changes. But generally, there tends to be that oil and gas operations that are taking place on those ranches and those farms, they are beneficial to those farms and ranchers. Now, does that mean that there's no issues that take place there? No, there absolutely are issues. Issues of, where are roads? Do trucks stay on roads? When it gets muddy out there, do they drive around the mud pits and mess up more of the pasture land? Do pipelines bust and you spill salt water and have to do remediation for those? There are those issues that all take place on that property that continues that negotiation process for the life of the lease. And that's where that landman becomes a critical role in managing the people.
Who do you think this was written for?
That's
MTV Productions. So it's right out of the gate. I thought, oh, this has got a youthful direction, or a youthful production company behind it. The Babes and Brews, the coffee shop that has the girls in bikinis, which is, I thought, dead on. Honestly, I thought that was spot on.
I've never seen a coffee shop like that in my life. So.
Oh, I've seen quite a bit. In fact, if you go on TikTok and Instagram, they live stream in making coffee in their bikinis and the whole deal. And I understood that whole sex appeal for the oil patch, because that's a very real thing. The texting and driving PSA, that I thought they did a wonderful job. I want to touch on that, how that was very much a big part of it, how Billy Bob even pulled over and he pointed to his wife, who was trying to divert his attention away from the road to her. And he's like, "I'm trying to drive, I'm trying to survive here." And he kept showing the semis going by. I thought that was fantastic. I think this is, honestly, I think this is written more for women than men. And one of the things I do want the oil and gas industry to be pretty well aware of is that this is an attempt at positively shedding some light on the industry. And the reason I say that is I don't know how many times, I don't know if they're trying to release a new positive country music album during this series, but whenever they transition to a new scene, there was always some positive, upbeat, generally country music going, but the backdrop was oil and gas rigs. It wasn't families, it wasn't things away from the rigs. So the fact that they showed the rigs with the positive music for as their kind of their backdrop, that's them setting the tone. That's them setting the stage. So as ridiculous as the cartel thing was, as real as the traffic is, as kind of the seeds of sex, drugs, and rock and roll have been laid out throughout the entire episode. I did think that this was meant to be a positive spin on the light when it's all, or a positive spin on the industry when it's all said and done. But I do think it's written more for women than men. What are your thoughts on that?
I I have a hard time nailing down exactly what it's written for. I haven't seen enough of the show yet to figure that out. I know it was not. It's definitely not written for oil and gas audience. It's definitely not written for a older age audience.
Not for hardcore oil and gas
No,
conservatives. No, no,
no.
not by any means.
And so, but I think that you hit on a few things. If you ever driven down I-20 or I-10, either one of those, where in a lot of places the speed limit's up to 80 miles an hour, and you got trucks and you got everything. I go down to Midland, I run a camp in Midland every single summer, and I drive that road every single year, 3 or 4 times, setting up for the camp and running the camp. And that road is just like it's portrayed in the movie. I mean, it is. If you're going to talk on the phone, you better pull off the road, and you better pull way off the road. And because there's a lot of traffic that's going up. There's a lot that's going on. And so again, I agree with some of the realism that's there. I also agree with some of the realism that's there as far as who is actually working in the oil industry. In the oil industry, I think there's a possibility that some of it was written to appeal to roughnecks, people who are working in the oil and gas industry. Not necessarily the executives, not necessarily those who are really kind of in the corporate world of the oil and gas industry, but those who are out in the field. Those who are out in the field are predominantly young men. A lot of them are single. A lot of them have had very hard backgrounds, and a lot of them do have records. And one of the things that was referenced in the industry or in the movie or in the show was we got into this Hispanic community, which if you go down to Texas, even if you look here in Western Kansas, the oil and gas industry, the patch is turning more and more Hispanic in the workers that are out there. It is an extremely tough job. It tends to bring in young men who a lot of them are single and filling their Wheaties, as we might say, going forward. And some of them do have questionable past. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing from the standpoint of a few weeks ago, I went to Tyson Foods and went to one of their factories and where they were processing meat and going through. And I did an entire tour of the factory, just kind of learning about what they do, how they do it, how petroleum is used in that process. And then at the end of it, they had a panel that was sitting up there with about 6 employees that were some of their highest ranking employees. And as we went through, 5 out of the 6 of those employees that were working in that meat packing plant, 5 out of the 6 said, "This was my second chance and I wasn't going to mess it up." And they rose to the ranks of middle management. And that's what you see in the oil industry as well. There are very few places that people who have a questionable past can really make a substantial living and have an opportunity to rise, have an opportunity to expand their futures. And the oil and gas industry is one of those industries that does open the doors for some of those people to be able to have a good paying job. But it is a hard job. It is a difficult job that provides the lifeblood of our nation.
End of the episode, the cliffhanger. We got to know Billy Bob Thornton. His name is Norton. His son is one of the lead characters. Of course, you have Billy Bob Thornton as the main character, the Landman. His wife, Ali Larter, she was in Varsity Blues. The
Yep.
old, yeah, she was the one who had the whipped cream bikini on. So she's all grown up now, 25 years later. Boy, does she look like she was plucked right out of West Texas. She looks like perfect for that role. I mean, everything about her looks like something out of West Texas. And then the daughter is dating a high school football top 50 prospect. And so there's a little bit of drama there. So we've got a daughter with daddy issues. We've got Billy Bob Thornton, Landman, that's cold as ice, being held by the cartel, no problem there. You know, can remember years of when oil companies switched dates and switched ownerships while the bag over his head, cutting a deal with the cartels and all these other things. But end of the episode had the cliffhanger, if you will. There was a lot of other stuff that led up to this, and I thought the last scene, if you will, the explosion. We'll go ahead and give it away. Spoiler alert. There was an explosion at the end. One of the
You're supposed to say spoiler alert before you say what
yeah,
the end.
yeah, that's right. But this is a reaction, so we think most people have at least watched it. But to me, I thought that was one of the most real parts of the whole show. Was that if you do not follow a proper procedure and you do not follow proper protocols, one click of the hammer
Yeah.
can create a spark, and any leaking gas from any one of those rigs can go up in flames. And just like driving out on the road, every inch matters with your life.
Yeah.
Every safety procedure matters, because the whole reason there's a safety procedure in place is because generally somebody died in order for that safety procedure to go into place. So talk to me a little bit about the cliffhanger. What'd you think at the end there as Billy Bob Thornton's son gets ejected back from the explosion force?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think one is it shows the limitations of Hollywood to be able to really express what happens in the industry. Because a few scenes earlier, Billy Bob Thornton's son was climbing a rig up into the tower to find a mythical valve that wasn't there because he's being hazed because he's a green employee. And that tends to happen in all jobs everywhere, where the new guy that comes in, you kind of play little jokes on him here and there.
And sports.
Yeah. But the reality is someone who's climbing the tower is not going to be also managing a pumping unit that's out in the field. Those are two different jobs, especially at that size of company. That might occasionally happen here in Kansas when you're talking about marginal wells. But generally, when you're talking about major companies like that down in the Permian Basin, the guy that's climbing the tower is not going to be out servicing a well. Those are
Not in the same day, too.
in the same day. Yeah, those are two different jobs completely. And I think a lot of people don't realize how many jobs there are in the oil and gas industry, how specific they are to what they actually are supposed to do. And I've never seen a pumping unit, someone going out to check a pumping unit, a pumper, as we call them in the industry, going out to check a pumping unit that had 4 people with them. They're usually out there by themselves. But I think that you're exactly right when it comes down to the fact that it was good in showing that what caused the tragedy was using the wrong equipment. None of the guys that were standing at that pumping unit were dressed in the appropriate gear. And they were using the wrong tools and banging away on the wrong tools. If it doesn't work, get a bigger hammer instead of the right tool. And that's what caused a problem. And we have become such a safe industry here in the United States that the vast majority of problems that are there, the vast majority of tragedies that happen because someone is not following safety protocols. Yeah, I've been at numerous refineries. I've been in pipe installation companies. I've done safety briefings where be your brother's keeper is the theme behind all of it. If you see something wrong, say something. and ensuring that everybody's following the practices, following the procedures, using the correct tools, because that is what prevents tragedy from taking place. And so I think that the tragedy itself was a pretty realistic event. The fact that someone who was working on a drilling rig that was now working on a pumping unit was not so realistic in today's world, because there are hundreds of jobs in the oil and gas industry. And not too long ago, I did a video where I filmed 4 different wells being put in from stake in the ground all the way through the drilling process, through the completion process, to the tank batteries being set, all the way to flow when they were actually pumping out oil at the other end. And what was amazing to me about that is as I was filming it, I had people that would come up to me on a regular basis that were working in the oil industry that said, when you get that video done, I want to see it, because I know what happens right before I come to the patch. I know what happens while I'm there. And I know what happens after I leave the patch, but I don't know the rest of the process. It's so specific to the jobs that each one of these workers do that a lot of these workers have no understanding of the comprehensive task that it takes to find, drill, and implement and put into place and work a well. A landman is kind of an exception to that, because that's their job. Their job is to be able to explain to the landowners what is going on their land at this point in time. And so that requires them to kind of have a more fuller knowledge of what is going on and how it's taking place and all those things. So I agree with you that, I think it's key to focus in on the fact that the proper equipment, the proper way of doing our business is what saves lives. And anytime you change that, anytime you deviate from that plan, that's when you put people at risk, because it is a risky industry. It's high risk, high reward, and therefore we have to have high safety in the industry.
I thought it was kind of funny because in the beginning, or fairly early on, when they were going through the coffee drive-through of the Babes and Brews, they had their.
You keep coming back to that. I don't know. You keep coming back to that. So I'm just saying.
Those guys had a very specific safety protocol reason for not putting milk in your coffee.
Yeah.
Where they actually dumped it out.
Yeah.
Fast forward to the end there, if they didn't follow the safety procedures, that's what happened. So I thought it was kind of funny that they went full circle with their policies and their procedures in a variety of different ways. But
well, I think that goes a lot to any job that you go into.
Yeah.
And any job that you go into, anyone that's green that comes in, you call them out on every single point that they're doing wrong. I mean, you call them out because you're training them. And then when we tend to work in our jobs over time, we tend to get a little more lax with ourselves, because I have the experience, I have the background. And in the oil industry, that's when you get in trouble. I love to go rappelling and rock climbing and do that kind of stuff. And I always take teenagers with me, and I teach them and train them how to do it. And I've always told them, every single time I tell them, if you ever get to the edge of a cliff to rappel down that cliff and you're not afraid, there's not a little part of you that's worried and concerned and afraid, don't do it, because that's when you're going to die. That's when you're going to get in trouble, is because you have to understand the monster that you're working with. And therefore you take all the procedures and all the safety measures to ensure that you do it the right way.
Well, we got episode 2 coming up tomorrow. I'm going to watch it tomorrow, so we'll have to get a reaction video in for that. Coming off of the explosion, and Billy Bob's son is going to be processing some of that. Now, I'm not sure what's going to happen on that, but overall, what did you think of the first episode with the series?
Well, I thought the first episode, to me, if I didn't know anything about the oil and gas industry, I would be definitely intrigued, because anyone who lives in an area where you drive by oil wells, you drive by drilling rigs, you see those trucks that are out on the road, there's a curiosity that's there. I work at the state fair, and people come by the booth, and they're always curious about what is that machine actually doing? How does it get the oil to the surface? There's a real interest that is there. So I see the series so far starting out that if I wasn't a part of the oil and gas industry, I'd be like, that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool show that's there. Being part of the oil and gas industry, I didn't like how it coupled us in the same light as cartels. In the very first scene, it coupled us as you have a drug, we have a drug, and our drug's bigger. And that's not what oil and gas is. Oil and gas is a resource that protects people from the environment, has created the lifestyle that we live in, has made us the people that we are today, and enables us to benefit and to do the work that we do today in ways that we could not even have begun to imagine 100 years ago. I was disappointed that it's began that way as comparing the oil industry to a drug cartel. I've seen tons and tons of online reviews that have used that portion of it to really talk about, is Taylor Sheridan going to go into the direction of talking about climate change? Is he going to go into talking about how damaging it is to the planet? Is he going to go into talking about all these other things? I was really hoping this show was going to come out and really show how beneficial the oil and gas industry is to the planet. Are we perfect? No. Are there downsides to our industry? Yes. Are there things that we need to mitigate and moderate? Yes. But overall, we are a significantly beneficial industry to the world and to humanity and help in human flourishing across the world. And so, from that standpoint, from the oil and gas industry, I was a little bit disappointed in it, that it compared us immediately right off the bat with the drug cartels, because we are not anything close to the drug cartels that are taking advantage of people in order to profit themselves. We do create a lot of profit because it is a high risk, high reward, but you have a lot of oil companies that also lose everything because it's high risk, high reward. But the benefits that come from our industry are extremely significant to humanity as a whole. Nothing like what comes from the drug industry. Nothing at all like what comes from the drug industry. So I was very disappointed in that, and I'm not going to get over that anytime soon. But I was very disappointed in that. But I think that overall, it's a show that I would, if I didn't know anything about the oil industry, I'd be intrigued and I'd be sitting there watching it.
Warren Martin is his name. We're talking about Landman. Paramount Plus is where you can find it. We have a link right down here below in the description. And I suppose, negotiating some land leases with Ma and Pa Kettle isn't going to be the same effect as like a drug cartel. It's really isn't going to grab you right out of the gate with the intense intrigue, if you will. So I'm excited.
I've like I said, I've grown up in small towns and lived in small towns all over. You get grandma involved in those negotiations.
That's a good point.
It can get very serious very quick.
That is a good point, because the cartel business that was over pretty quick. Once they started talking the cartel language, that was the end of that. They just kept moving on. But
I think that's why I felt like it was just setting it up to make the comparison between drugs and oil. And I felt like that was a very unfair comparison, that it hasn't come, and maybe it comes back to it later in the series, but I felt like it was a very unfair comparison to compare oil to drugs right off the bat.
Well, I do think in our next review, or maybe one down the line, I would like to go back to a scene in episode 1, which I think is going to come back in some other episodes. But there was a scene where one of the oil trucks went through a plane that was unloading a bunch of drugs from the cartel to their couriers, and it was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it was one of the most ridiculous scenes. It was a great depiction of a reality accident, which happens every day in the oil patch. But coming over the hill, you've got a plane parked, taking up both lanes on the road. I get it; it's a private road, but if there's oil rigs going back and forth, they're going to be aware of these types of things. They're not going to take up the whole road. And so, as many problems as there were, the one part that kind of I was a little surprised they went there was with the sheriff. Was with when Billy Bob came in and started micromanaging the sheriff's detailed sheriff report, and what it did throughout the entire episode, whether it was with the rancher not paying the damages, but rather figure out some sort of solar farm management grant as a workaround, or whether it's trying to make sure that the sheriff puts something in his report so when the workaround comes from the EPA, there's some sort of controlling the narrative is what was a very big part of Billy Bob's job throughout the entire episode. And I do think that that scene with the cartel and the sheriff and that whole deal, I I don't want to make it be overblown because there's dead bodies there, there's drug dealers there, it's private land, this is a private road. There are so many reasons to not go over the top with it, but at the same time, unpack it a little bit for the average person so they don't walk away saying, "Oh, the oil companies own the sheriff."
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. There was a lot of reasons behind. Was Billy Bob 100% ethical for what he did? Oh, heck no. Heck
Yeah.
no. But at the same time, private road, all these different things are going on. So, just, in a couple of minutes, what was your kind of re- quick reaction to that whole micromanaging the narrative?
Well, it started out when we first started talking about how this was the Yellowstone, what Yellowstone was, a farming community. This is for the oil and gas community, and it's a theme that goes through Taylor Sheridan's films or shows that he puts forward. I mean, you go to Yellowstone and you look at the Duttons and what's going on with the Duttons, and they control the police too. They control the narrative. They manage the narrative, and I think that there's really a theme that goes through this that's already kind of started and moving through it, that this idea that a lot of people in America have, that big oil, big industry, big ag, big, whatever, pharmaceutical, whatever, that they control the law enforcement agencies. And they get to script and sculpt this narrative that they want going forward. And I can tell you right now, working with oil and gas producers here in the state of Kansas, nothing could be further from the truth. Our biggest battle, and Landman's biggest battle, is negotiating between the surface right owners, the mineral right owners, and the oil company to get a project completed. For the oil and gas company itself, the biggest battle is not there. The biggest battle is working with the regulatory agencies, working with the federal government, and working with local governments to get the permitting process, get those checked off, have all those things checked off on a regular basis. There is so much oversight in the oil and gas industry, especially here in the United States, that was probably the most far-fetched thing that was in the show. Is yes, the landman is there to try and sculpt the narrative that is going forward, but the fact that a landman had power over a sheriff, that's a hard one to stretch to, because there are so many regulatory agencies that would have been at that site rather than just the sheriff, that the landman would not have any authority over. You got a hazmat situation, and you're going to have the EPA there. You're going to have the state agencies that are there. And those people are the ones where the biggest challenge for the oil and gas industry are. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Why? Because it has created an industry here in the United States that does a better job than any other country in the world in developing and utilizing oil and natural gas, because of our regulatory atmosphere that is here, and because we do things the right way. And so I was a little disappointed in that. I agree with you that the landman is there to help sculpt that narrative. I don't think that, it's anywhere close to where a landman could walk up to a sheriff and say, "Hey, why don't you change your report?" I think that landman would probably end up in handcuffs.
What I took away from that scene, and then we'll conclude for today, was that number one, the plane was stolen. So therefore, we're going to possibly have some insurance. We're going to possibly have some more law enforcement coming in. We're with the drug cartel and possibly even some international. So I mean, that scene is as much as overreaction that could come from there. It was probably the most stretched out in terms of laying the
Yeah.
setting the table, if you will, for the plot line going forward. You know, it's interesting because I've never even heard or thought about the cartel and the oil companies in Texas ever. Like honestly, I've never I've heard of it in the cannabis industry. I've heard of it in the pharmaceutical industry. I even heard of it in the agriculture industry. But I just have never really heard of the cartel being active in the oil and gas industry. And so it was a very interesting way to start it out. It was
Yeah.
very, I think it was more geography than anything, and some of the Netflix successes of the different shows with that particular thing. But anyways,
But you look at what narratives that people. I mean, we just had an election that took place, and you look at what are the top priorities that people had. And
immigration.
immigration was a huge one.
Yep.
Economics, oil and gas. These are and so basically, to me, it was a way to, based on location, to throw in something that a lot of people have an opinion on. They have a very open um, expression about. And but the reality is, I agree with you 100%. I go down Permian Basin quite a bit. Is the cartel involved? Is the cartel active in that area? Absolutely, no doubt about it. Have I heard about them being involved in the oil and gas industry? No. Much less, as they implied in that first episode, that plane wasn't really stolen. It was stolen, meaning that the oil company allowed them to utilize it. And if they got caught, they would say it was stolen.
Right, right.
And so that was collaboration between the oil and gas industry and the cartel. And I don't know of any of that.
More to come, that's for sure. His name is Warren Martin. Check him out. Kansas Strong. My name is Jason Spees with This Week in Energy and the Crude Life. We'll see you later on this week here, folks.